Testing, testing. Okay, cool. What's going on, everybody? Yeah, we just had Sunday school today, and I was so excited about what we learned that I had to come on right here and just get right into it for today's video along with it. I was so glad also to do these videos because I had a friend come to church, and that friend also brought a friend. So just knowing that these are having a positive impact makes me feel good. And if you're watching this on YouTube or whatever the case, if you could like it, subscribe it, share it so that other people are getting something out of it too, that's much appreciated. So, okay, today we're getting into the lesson that they wrote in the book was called Change as Promised. We're looking at the book of Jeremiah. Last week we looked at Jeremiah. We've been looking at Jeremiah for a few weeks now. And what I'm learning about the book of Jeremiah is that everything in the book of Jeremiah comes to us in episodes. So there are, we're catching different versions of Jeremiah on this journey. I also knew that Jeremiah was on a 40-year journey in this quest that God had him on. God had him from a child be ready to give this word. And I thought it was 40 years, but it turns out even after the 40 years, he went on to do other things, which just shows me that, once you finish a certain mission, the next mission follows, especially when that's your calling. The mission may be complete, but the calling can still remain. So we look at this particular text, and they use this anecdote about somebody had some work they needed to get done at their house, and in order to install an appliance, they had to sand everything back down into its foundation, which is reminding me that when we want to start over, when we want to start anew, a lot of times you got to cut what no longer serves you. So in this anecdote, they sanded everything down to a certain foundation. I also think it's important to note that in this same anecdote, they applied coats, like they painted they were painting the wood structure that they were doing, and so to paint it, they had to paint it with some varnish. They had to let it dry, sand it down, paint it again. So they had to do 30 coats, which is quite a bit of coating to get this really nice finish. You don't get the finish with just one coating of the paint. You have to continue to add coats and add them in their right time, because you can't just add 30 coats at once. You have to coat it, let it settle, let it get in there, and then you can coat it again. So this reminded me also just how, looking at the word, it's a lot of layers to it, just a lot of layers to it. And the more we revisit and come back to our work, to our word, to our source, it's that much more ingrained in us. My very first yoga teacher, Sam Chase, great guy, he mentioned when you dye something, you have to dip it in the dye. You have to let the wind go through it to dry it out before you can dip it again. And because you lose some of it with each dip, with each every time it dries, some of it goes away. But as you continue to dip it, that color gets stained in it and it becomes enriched. So we look at that in this introduction: sanding things down, starting anew, and then allowing yourself to continue to be enveloped with the thing that you're doing so that the coating of it stays solid. So I thought that was a great introduction to the Sunday school lesson as a whole. Then looking at the lesson context again, this book of Jeremiah is full of different episodes. We get different things going on, but overall he's in this land where there's a lot of sinning going on. People have lost their way in terms of the traditions that were serving them or getting them to a point, and he's here to kind of share with them, the word or the truth, if you will. So we look at the first verse that we're studying here, Jeremiah 31. It says, "In those days they shall say no more, the fathers have eaten a sour grape, and the children's teeth are set on edge." So what this particular verse talks about is the sins of the father affecting the child, so to speak. We learn about the sin. God mentions in a different passage earlier on about the iniquity of the fathers upon the children unto the third and fourth generations of them that hate me. Basically, what people's ancestors did, their fathers did, was having an effect on what's going on with them. I guess that's the old law. You can look at this in everyday life as well, especially when you look at, let's say, a family where a parent is incarcerated. the reasons or whatever that this person's incarcerated are not the children's fault, aren't the family's fault, but now they're being affected by it. Or maybe you have a certain stain or reputation on your family's name, and when they see you, like, oh, you one of the Joneses, you one of the Herds. I just use my name. We one of the Herds. They have a certain feeling about these people, so the sins or the transgressions of the past generation are somehow affecting the generation now, which is interesting to look at because we go on to this new covenant, verse 30, this new reality. But everyone shall die for his own iniquity. Every man that eateth the sour grape, his teeth shall be set on edge. So now we shift into this way where it's no longer the generational trauma that's holding people hostage, or it doesn't have to hold people hostage. Rather, everyone will be accountable for their own iniquities, their own sins, transgressions, and things like that. And for me, that offered a level of hope for those of us who feel like they'll never be more than what their family amounted to. You are not held to what your family did or did not do. You are only going to be held by the actions of yourself. And vice versa. If your family does good but you don't do good, that might not be enough to save you. Let me see. What I also got from this is that though we are affected by the past, we are not accountable for their actions. Okay? Though we're affected by what happened in the past, we're not accountable for their actions. But we are responsible for how we navigate, regardless of what we have working against us. Again, we're responsible for how we navigate the things that show up in our life. We may not be accountable for everyone's sins. We can't say, we're the reason that so-and-so did what they did in the past. But we are accountable for what we do about it. So if someone hurt you way back in the past, that only gives you so much of an excuse to how you show up in today's world, today's reality. With that being said, if someone showed up to you in if things happened to you in the past that you felt determined your value or your worth, you don't have to embrace that either. You can also let that go. Be accountable for yourself, but also allow yourself the grace, the same grace that God is offering us, which is, as we talk in our Sunday school, grace being unmerited favor. Give yourself the grace to forgive and let go of the past things, so that you can be focused on what's anew right now. Right? So we see that these can be interpreted based on these texts here. Okay. What I found interesting was looking at we're in Jeremiah 31. The Israelites, I think they were dealing with the Israelites. Yeah, the Israelites were basically not doing what they were supposed to do. Just to sum it up, they were basically not doing what they were supposed to do. And my question is, why couldn't these people get right? Why can't they get right? They seem to not get right. They had a covenant with God, a covenant and an agreement. And, this says that they broke the covenant. They weren't living in the way that God wanted them to. So I'm like, why couldn't these people get right? And what we look at is a lot of things. Well, one, that they were around surrounding nations that were living not in the way that God would have them live. So people weren't living right around them. And the thing about your environment is you're only going to be able to rise so much above it, in a sense. So their environment was one that caused them to be not living right. So they're not living right, be in this environment that's not living right. And this environment that they're in, which was, illuminated in the Sunday school lesson, was Israel. They're not just around these people in huts, living kind of scattered, who have this certain way of life. No, they're around kingdoms, full civilizations that have a way of life that isn't aligned with their way of life and is pulling them away from this covenant that God would have for them. You look at a lot of different kings In the course of history, even in the biblical history, you take a king like King Solomon, who was a man that was super, I guess you could say, super ingrained into God's word. Had a lot of wives. He had a bunch of wives. Solomon had all these wives, and all these wives came from different civilizations. And these different civilizations had different ways of life, different idols, different things that they practiced. And Solomon was absorbing all of them. And through absorbing all of these, he lost sight of his own mission, which is just the interesting thing when you see that he had all these women and he had all these influences, and his focus started to change. So he lost the initial pivot that he was on in the first place, that God had him to be. So that was just another note to stay woke on the things that you have, because, being a king requires a lot, and heavy is the head that holds the crown. And so all these kings have a lot of decisions, and they have a lot of power, and that can be a lot to juggle. And that can also be a lot to ask a king to have humility. That came up in our Sunday school too. It's hard to be humble when you're a king, when you have all this rule, when you have all this opportunity to do what you want. And so a lot of these kings that lose sight along the way. They've lost humility, or never knew how to have humility, because they never had to be humbled. And for a lot of us, once you feel something crushing in your life, it really does humble you. And it just raises the question of, is that needed? Do we need to be crushed first in order to feel the humility? I mean, a lot of people right now in this day and age that we're living are coming back closer to God. They're coming back closer to their way of trying to find something higher than them. Maybe because the world is in such disarray. Maybe because people are feeling such a crushing like existence, or just circumstances are crushing right now. We could name the list of things, but the cool uncool thing is, you could play this clip in 2025. You could play it 10 years from now. You could have played it in 2015, 10 years ago. There's always going to be an issue politically, economically, has us feeling like we're in our last days. And so we have this choice. How are we going to navigate the time that we have? Because a lot of people who were born in 2015, or just alive in 2015, may not be alive here in 2025, who may not be alive here in 2035, 10 years from it, right? So with the time that you have now and the circumstances that you're in now, how do you navigate? Really important. So, okay, what else can we look at here? A lot of good stuff. The crazy thing about going through a Sunday school lesson is, you could go so many different ways with it. These are just a few things that I picked up based on the things that people are sharing. It's really important, I think, for me to have some level of fellowship, so you can bounce ideas off everybody. So everybody's coming from a different place. But anyway, just to try to stay on track to some degree, Israelites couldn't get right because of the surrounding nations that weren't doing good. And when your environment is influencing you, you have to be mindful of the influence. And your environment is always influencing you. So therefore, you always have to be mindful of the environment. Also, each generation that continued each generation started to forget what God did for the generation prior. We look at just last week in Jeremiah 35, these people were following their great ancestor Jebediah or something like that, or Jedediah, some with a J. They were following him, and they stayed true to his way of practicing God, because they knew that it was a strong tradition, and they were rewarded for that. A lot of us, when our leaders are gone, we don't know how to act anymore. Same way when the teacher leaves the classroom, people start cutting up because the teacher's not there to enforce it. Or you look at in modern American history, we lose a Malcolm X, we lose a Martin Luther King, we lose certain leaders, and there isn't always somebody there to pick it back up, and then the generations next are lost. Or you lose a father in the household, and then you lose certain values because of it. When the leadership goes, it's really hard to keep the fire blazing. And even in the time of Moses, Moses leaves for a bit, and how quickly they forget. Moses isn't even allowed to go through the promised land with the people. He's forced to watch back, and then the people get restless, they get impatient. And it raised a question today in Sunday school: how long is too long to wait for a person, right? And too long is too long for anybody. People have low tolerance for having to wait. And when you got, a cell phone or whatever the case, everything is generally instant. So it makes it that much more difficult to want to have to wait. So patience is a virtue, as we see. The people forget, what have you done lately? What have you done for me lately? As the singer once said. And also, maybe the covenant in itself was something that was just too difficult for anybody to keep up with, which is why we find out later in this lesson that there's a second covenant that needs to be made. I had a buddy recently. We were on the phone having a great conversation. We like to spiritually spar, I think is what we call it sometimes, just back and forth with ideas. And he was sharing this idea that, Adam and Eve fell short. And we're all paying for it for a certain degree. Kind of goes back to this lesson about the iniquities of the father that are affecting the children. And so in some ways, the Bible would say because Adam and Eve did what they did, eating the forbidden fruit, we all were cursed with an over awareness, a tree of knowledge, and we were what our innocence was lost essentially in the story, and we're all paying for it. But I wonder what if Adam and Eve were the best of us? Adam and Eve were the best of us, and they did the best that they could, and no matter who it was, any of us, all of us, would have at some point fell victim to sin, shortcomings, as they did. It goes back to me about the heavy is the head that wears the crown. It's easy to watch from the sideline, from the crowd, and have an opinion about what someone should have did or what you would have did in their situation. But it's much harder to actually live it. And if you've ever seen something that you thought was easy, and then you tried it and it was more difficult than you thought, then you know what I'm talking about. It looks easy, simple. Don't eat the fruit, right? But the pressures that they might have been facing, the temptation, the power of temptation, I know we've all been there. So maybe the covenant was one that was always going to be broken. This covenant of following God's law, because God knew that there was never going to be enough external motivation or pressure to keep people in alignment with the way that they need to be. There was never going to be enough external pressure for people to stay on task in the way that they needed to be. There needed to be an internal messaging that would keep people locked in. And you look at this when we look at verse 33, when they talk about this new covenant. But this shall be the covenant that I will make with the house of Israel. After those days, saith the Lord, I will put my law in their inward parts, and write in their hearts, and will be their God, and they shall be my people. So God talks about it's no longer going to be written on a tablet, like the tablets of the commandments, but rather written in your heart. And it'll no longer have to be you following the rules to have salvation. But in this context, it'll be through the son of David, who we know the lineage of King David all the way down would be Jesus. So no longer is it on you exclusively for your salvation in terms of what you, the individual, can do. And it becomes much more about what is divinely inside of you, the truth that you're bringing out, and how well are you able to be obedient to the message with every ups and downs that may come with it. Without knowing the timeline for how long you'll have to live in this way, how do you manage to live in this way? I'm going to end it here because this is a good amount. And this is more, I'm sure everybody will take time to learn and break it down for themselves. But when you have something in your heart, it requires less notes. And I don't mean notes that you might not take to keep on task, but just when it's in you, and it's easy to speak it out. And it doesn't have to be in you born and you can't acquire it, but rather it can be like that finish. When we talk about that stain finish, or when you dye something, the more you let it ingrain in you, the easier it is to let it be shown outside. So how does your life look different when you know something instead of having to look it up? Or I should say, after you've looked it up and you've internalized it, how does it show up when it's truly ingrained or stitched into your heart? So this was a great lesson. I learned a bunch from it. I always learn a bunch fellowshipping with my Sunday school people. Remember, it's hard to be humble, but life will humble you. And if we stay faithful, we stay diligent, and we stay putting ourselves in the environment that we need to be in, then I am more than confident that great things will continue to happen for us. Lord, thank you for this time. Thank you for this energy. Thank you for allowing just another moment of light to be spread out. Hopefully this message reaches someone as it reached my heart today. In your name we pray, amen and ashe.